So often, business owners tend to be the bottleneck of their business growing and scaling for whatever reason. We've all been there where we're wearing all the hats, we're doing all of the things, right? And often we're thinking about like, okay, we want to grow and scale, but we don't know of the million things that are on our plates, what's best to take off our plates.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Workergenics Mastermind. Today we have special guest Sera Deva with Triple Creeks Consulting. And she is an expert on business systems and helping small businesses with their operations and digital operations online. She is going to share a really special topic today that we've implemented recently in our business. It's been huge, and that is creating job descriptions. So welcome to the podcast,
Hey,
Sera.
Harley, doing well. Thanks. Hope you are too.
Thank you. Maybe you can just give us a little background about yourself professionally and how you came to doing the consulting that you do.
Yeah, so I have a background in nonprofit management. Anyone who's been in the nonprofit world knows that nonprofits have a lot of turnover just naturally because generally nonprofit workers tend to be overworked and underpaid. So they get burned out pretty quick, and there's a lot of cycling through of people in that field. And so as a result, operations and systems of nonprofits is super, super important in basically retaining and being able to easily hire and kind of maintain an organization through a lot of turnover. So while working with nonprofits, I kind of branched into specifically operational design, which I'm just pretty naturally good at, and kind of trying to make different nonprofits systems function in a way that will support their growth and sustainability. So that's what my professional background is. And then after about 6 to 7 years in that field, I was getting so many requests from people who knew me and knew the work that I did to just kind of come work for them instead of working for any one single nonprofit. And it just made me realize how necessary that kind of thinking is. And so I started working with a lot of different clients, and now my business is pretty much entirely referral based on folks that just see the value of getting their literal shit organized.
Well, so you were going to share kind of talking about job descriptions. You were mentioning earlier that, it's come up a lot with your clients recently. And so it's something that I'm really interested to hear about, and let you kind of take it away and tell us what the importance of having job descriptions.
Yeah, you were asking me where, what I thought this conversation, like the angle that it should take. And I just had a lot of clients come up recently, the need for job descriptions pretty much right out the gate when I started working with them, because they have a desire. Often people will come to me when they want to grow and scale what it is that they're doing. And they've already kind of determined, okay, what they are doing is needed in the market. It's just a matter of being able to provide for the demand, basically. And so a lot of people come to me in that stage. And these organizations that I've been working with recently have all come to me in that stage of wanting to grow and scale, but not necessarily knowing the best way to do that, just in the sense of not knowing what position they should be hiring for, not necessarily even knowing the words or like the skill set that's needed in order to get them where they're going next. And so job descriptions are a really amazing tool to start off with right off the bat for me to get to know the business. I should be clear, I work with businesses also. It's really operations and businesses and nonprofits are surprisingly similar. And so, you're kind of thinking about what is it that I need from the sense of what is it that I do? So often, business owners tend to be the bottleneck of their business growing and scaling for whatever reason. We've all been there where we're wearing all the hats, we're doing all of the things, right? And often we're thinking about like, okay, we want to grow and scale, but we don't know of the million things that are on our plates, what's best to take off our plates. So I usually go through with clients kind of a process of defining their own job description, which is 99% of the time, a CEO or a founder of a business is not going to have a job description because they just have not necessarily taken the time to sit and write it out, right? What it is, do they actually do? And sometimes it's a really painful process for people because I also ask them to like assign percentages to kind of like categorize the groups of things that they're doing and then assign percentages to what they're doing. And that's always really, really painful for people because they realize they need 200% and not just 100%, right? But through that process, we're able to really go through and define, I also ask them to highlight like, okay, what are the top 3 things that you could take off your plate if you had a magic wand, right? So they always are highlighting those things. I'm also asking them to highlight what are the things that they like to do and they would like to do more of if at all possible. And so through that exercise, we're kind of defining not only what their job description is, but what makes the most sense to be passed off. And I would say 90% of the time, that's more administrative level work, right? Which is a lot of what you guys do at Workogenics, of course. And sometimes it's not too. Sometimes it's more, director level or basically, another them, which is also possible. But it really depends on that job description activity. So job descriptions are just, amazing tools for defining what can be passed off.
Now, do you also, as part of that process, have them rank these activities in some level of like importance? Like, if it was to stop happening, how would that impact the business? Or is that something that is handled?
Yeah, I think that that's a good question. This activity often, because it's at a moment of growth, we're not necessarily analyzing the risks of that stopping, right? The majority of the stuff that they're going to need to keep for various reasons is just going to stay on their plate at this stage. But yeah, I think asking questions like that is always helpful, follow up. And often we're doing this with full teams, right? So we're not only doing this just for the CEO or the founder of the business, but we're doing it for all of the leadership team, so to speak, or the leadership of the organization. So lots of puzzle pieces that you can kind of cut and paste and rotate as needed to among team members as well.
In doing this exercise, do you ever find that they come across things they're doing or a team member might be doing and you're like, does this even need to happen? Can we just eliminate it entirely and save that time?
That's an interesting question. Yes, definitely. Largely when that happens, it's because of a technology deficiency, right? That they don't have support in some sort of technological way. And so that's also a lot of what we do is we help implement the technology that's needed. That's, obviously another process, but like kind of getting around to, what holes exist from a either administrative standpoint or automation standpoint that just aren't happening. Absolutely. Definitely. Stuff like that comes out.
All right. So they've got the list of things they're doing, roughly how long it's taking. What's the next step in this job description process?
Yeah, not only assigning percentages to buckets of work, I like to standardize also in this process. So we're also like kind of updating the job descriptions based on a standard template for the organization. And so those job descriptions can be used both as external tools and internal tools. So then we talk, of course, about, what the importance is of job descriptions. I've already kind of given you my philosophy of like, these are really great for learning how to delegate things, but not only that, they're really, really great for both from a management standpoint and from employee standpoint of monitoring themselves and checking in with their work and kind of their benchmarks over the year and making sure that that job description stays accurate. So I use job descriptions and evaluations, and I help people kind of integrate an evaluation process that goes along with a regular update of the job description. So it becomes both an internal tool where you're actually using it for monitoring and evaluation of that team member and keeping it really accurate for what that team member does. Because if that team member wins the lottery tomorrow, you have some sort of trail of where they're, what it is that they're doing. And you even have like maybe a ready job description to post. And then of course, an external tool, which is advertising the position to the public. Maybe it's a little bit more general, maybe you don't quite have as strict like percentages assigned and things like that. And it obviously might look a little bit different, but you have an external tool as well. And that external piece is also super important when you're talking about equity issues. I work with a lot with organizations that are run by women, people of color, what I like to call systemically excluded business and nonprofit professionals that are really trying to attract a diverse workforce. So that external tool and having consciousness of how you're using and advertising that external tool, including the sections that you're adding into the job descriptions, the language that you're using, can really encourage like a diverse applicant pool in a way that's, it's your first impression with the prospective hire. So we talk about how to implement kind of both of those sides, those internal and external sides. And depending on the contract, I'll kind of walk them through, different aspects of that.
Now, you mentioned something that I was interested to hear more about. You were talking about like the benchmarks that you're going to be measuring for the people performing these jobs. How does the job description help translate into those benchmarks or other like measurements?
Yeah,
What
that's
is
a
that?
great question. I consider the job description to be kind of the skeleton of the benchmarks that you're going to create internally for that person, especially because, again, it's an external tool. It's the first impression that your prospective employee gets, right, of your organization. And as a result, they're going to have certain expectations of that job description. So if you've really consciously thought about what those job descriptions look like, you should be able to take that job description, use those, say bolded themed sections of the work that they're doing and the percentage of time, and translate that into benchmarks that you're then evaluating the team member for. And those benchmarks should be very transparent and clear from literally the day that they were hired with that job description, have a very easy, clear correlation through whatever work plans or task lists you might create, milestones you might create for that team member in your other areas. So again, another reason why job descriptions are so important to create.
What are some of the realizations or like benefits that you've seen in your clients once they go through this process with you of creating the job descriptions?
I think it's both, a benefit again for the manager from a clarity standpoint and for the employee from a clarity standpoint. There's a lot of synergy, I would say, that gets built from understanding and being clear of what expectations are. It often encourages and creates a much more related evaluation process because that's kind of like the step 2 to job descriptions. It's like, okay, great. We talked job descriptions. Now we're talking work plans, task lists, and evaluation process, right? So it kind of like leads into that. And meaningful evaluation is so, so important from a team perspective and retention perspective. And getting regular feedback for employees is so, so important. So I would say like the job description is kind of the spark that kind of creates more of a systemic change within the organization of evaluation and transparency and documents that don't just get created in PDFs and get dusty on the drive shelves, right?
Yeah. So speaking of not getting dusty, how often do you recommend people go and like reevaluate the job descriptions and update them? Is it just kind of as needed, or do you like make sure people have a specific interval of time that they're reevaluating?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it depends on the size of your organization and what your management capacity is. I personally run a very small business with only 2 employees who are both VAs, actually, Filipino VAs, who are great. And for my size, I like to do quarterly evaluations for folks. And in those evaluations, we're at least looking at the job description. And part of the homework that they have for those evaluations is to look at their job descriptions and name if there's anything that they feel like is not reflected or needs to be added or needs to be changed. So that part of the evaluation is a very small part of the evaluation. We maybe talk about it for 2 minutes, right? But we do it quarterly. And that way it's just up to date basically at any given point.
Now, I guess I had a question that I forgot to ask earlier. When creating the job descriptions initially, is that done purely by like the management team, or do the employees in a case where like they don't have job descriptions and you already got employees, do the employees kind of come up with their own, or is it like top down approach, bottom up, or some hybrid?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say the majority of people come to me with some form of job description, even if it was just the job description that they put out for the employee or for the hire initially. Sometimes that's all it is. The majority of the time, the people who don't have the job descriptions are the directors or the CEOs or the people that are in the highest up positions, right? And so other folks kind of already have something to start with, but they are the ones who are empowered usually to be updating their own job descriptions. And then, of course, it eventually might get signed off by management depending on what's necessary.
Speaking of like non-leadership roles, when these employees have these clear job descriptions, what are some of the benefits or realizations that you've observed that the employees have when they're very clear with their job descriptions?
I've experienced a lot of initiative on the side of the employees when they have very clear job descriptions to create benchmarks that work for them, because that's another level of management that, again, depending on your size, you might not quite be at, where you're actually tracking KPIs and right things like that. Like I have 2 employees. I am not at the level where I'm tracking KPIs. That's not where I'm at. We do have informal milestones and we do check in with those milestones, right? But we're not really doing like a work plan or anything really advanced like that. That's just, we just don't need that quite yet. And so I've seen a lot of initiative. I've seen a lot of employees kind of coming in and being like, wow, I feel really clear on what I'm doing. And not only that, I feel clear on what I'm doing, that comes out of being able to write it themselves. They're like, yeah, this is what I do every day, right? And so it kind of also empowers them to be like, okay, well, how can I hold myself accountable for actually doing these things? And I've seen employees take an updated job description with no work plan or objectives or milestones, particularly, and turn it into a work plan and objectives and milestones, and turn it into task creation in a project management software because they feel really clear on what their tasks should be. So I think it really empowers, it can empower, especially employees on a small team, to build out other tools for themselves.
Do you ever observe a situation where, once someone has gone through the process of creating the job descriptions, and thinking of like employees, if the management team or director level people come to the employee and ask to do a particular task that maybe was not captured in that job description, how does that go over? And what are some, tools or approaches to handle that situation that inevitably happens?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I named that. That was actually, I'm glad you asked about that, because that was another thing that I missed that's a benefit, is it empowers the employees to come back to their supervisor when they're being repeatedly asked to do things that are not a part of their job description and say, hey, this is not a part of my job description. Like, we got to talk about this. Right. So that is another benefit that I see is like, and again, that's fostered through the evaluation process. So that's actually like specifically asked in the evaluation process. Like, are you being asked to do something, or are you doing something regularly that is not reflected in your job description? And that creates a talking point for the manager and the employee to talk about that. Like, oh, why is that not reflected? Should it be reflected? Should it not be reflected? Do we need to take something off as a result of that being there, right? Because that's, again, where the percentages come into, like, you're playing with those puzzle pieces, and they can kind of see, okay, if this new bucket of work is getting added to their plate, how might that affect things?
What about like priority tasking? Does the job description help employees understand like the priority of what they should be working on a daily basis? Or is there a different tool that you recommend for handling that kind of
Yeah,
situation?
no, I would not say that the job descriptions handle priority, because I think priority changes and is much more fluid than job descriptions tend to be, depending on the position, of course. But I would say priority more belongs in something like a project management software or some other tool that the employee is interacting with multiple times a day, because that can rotate really quickly.
Awesome. So what else should people be aware of when thinking about getting started with job descriptions? Do you have anything that is like helpful to think about, or like a guide that might be useful?
Yeah, I have a job description template that I can definitely share with folks in whatever way is easiest. I will send that up, or send that out as like a follow-up to this for you. And yeah, that template mostly talks about job descriptions. I would say not in necessarily the ways that we were talking about them today, but mostly in the equity ways that I was referring to, of like, here's some things that you want to think about from like just like an external standpoint. Here I have a lot of feels about job descriptions and thoughts about them as tools, but in order to really get into that, you need to become a client of mine, I guess, in order to get these types of insider tips. But I'm happy to send along the template, and you can kind of get a little sense of how I think about at least the external facing job description.
Awesome. Well, so to the audience out there, if you're hearing this and this is resonating with you and you feel like, it would really benefit your organization to get clear on job descriptions, definitely get in touch with Sera. We're going to have the link to her website in the video description below. It's triplecreeks.org. You can get in touch with her there, sign up for her newsletter, and get that job description template. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Awesome. Thanks,
today,
Harley.
Sera.